What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, August 9th, 2016. And it's, 91 days to the election. A reader wrote in and said, can we have a countdown clock? So we just put one into the left menu bar of WhatReallyHappened.com. So 91 days to go here. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. The Tantrum team is over there whacking on my server, so we'll just let them go and play for a while, and we'll get back to them later. Today is the anniversary of the nuclear bomb attack on Nagasaki. Now, very often, Nagasaki is almost historically considered a footnote. There was Hiroshima, and then there was this other place. But this other place was its own city and had the bad luck to be the victim of bad weather because they were actually the secondary target for that mission. The anniversary of Hiroshima was on Saturday. Today's the anniversary of Nagasaki. And over time, the real story about the nuclear bomb attack on Japan has been coming out. Japan was already on the verge of surrender. They'd been trying to surrender. They'd already been negotiating terms of surrender. The one sticking point they had was that the position of the emperor be left intact, because in the Japanese culture at that time, the emperor was almost semi-divine. And ultimately, the terms of the Japanese surrender that the U.S. accepted did leave the emperor right where he was. And in point of fact, the terms of surrender that the U.S. accepted from Japan after the bombing was identical to the terms of surrender rejected by the U.S. before the bombing. And more the evidence has come on out that the reason the nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan was not to end the war, but to demonstrate to the world that we had these weapons, and more importantly, were psychotic enough to go ahead and use them. And that was really it. And they did it twice to prove it wasn't just a fluke. And this gave the United States basically the big stick in geopolitics and gave the U.S. a tremendous advantage until the Rosenbergs gave the secrets of the nuclear weapons to the Soviet Union. All right, we're getting news here from the Olympics, and the U.S. has started winning medals. The very first medal was won in the shooting event. And all the gun grabbers are out there saying, oh, no, we can't have this, and we can't be winning gold medals with guns. What's wrong with you people? Why can't we get those refugees in Europe to use guns instead of knives and axes and the rest of it? Meanwhile, another member of the U.S. Olympic shooting team, Kim Rode, was out there openly criticizing California's insane gun laws, which really don't have any effect whatsoever on crime and terror. It's all about disarming the public. And there we go. Yeah, the Tantrum Squad is attacking my server. They don't like being called out on it. The reset file is running, though, so the website will be back here in a little bit. Now then, you remember that big deal that happened yesterday where the CNN host asked that Michael Phelps not be allowed to carry the U.S. flag so they could have diversity and political correctness, and they wanted a Muslim woman to carry the flag of the United States of America. The public reaction to that has been rather severe and against CNN. And by the way, the man who was carrying the flag for the United States of America, Michael Phelps, has already won his first gold medal in the men's 4x100-meter freestyle relay. So CNN is looking politically correct and rather idiotic all at the same time. Now, you remember that hijab-wearing Olympian, the fencer, Ibtihaj Muhammad, was out there declaring jihad on Donald Trump last week? I watched the fencing finals. She got trashed in the first round. It was just out, was just gone. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. Veronica in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. A friend of mine who ran for Senate in Arizona in '94 by the name of Al Banks has come up with a possible solution to stop voter fraud.
Oh, that would be a good idea.
Well, he emailed Sheriff Joe Arpaio yesterday and forwarded his idea to stop the tampering of voting machines, and it's really simplicity in itself. If the National Sheriff's Association would place a deputy in just a random number of voting places across the country,
okay, now
and then have them physically count the vote.
Can you back up a little bit, because we had a brief dropout on the phone line, and I missed the important part about what was going on, how to stop the fraud.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, he emailed Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and if the National Sheriff's Association would place a deputy in a random number of voting places across the country and have them physically count the votes in selected precincts, they could compare their tally with the official count from the count of the entire county's votes until the numbers, to make sure the numbers match.
Well, see, here's the problem. When you're in precincts where there are paper ballots and hand counting, the official results tend to be fairly honest and match the exit polls. It's inside the electronic machines where a lot of this stuff is going on. And as a result, deputies can't look inside the machine any more than anybody else can. Okay?
What do we do?
Well, assuming we can regain control of our nation, we need to basically be able to get rid of those electronic machines. Get rid of any system of voting an election that is not transparent and verifiable. And, of course, those who like the system just the way they are the ones who are, in fact, they've won their office, or they hope to win their office through vote fraud, and that's why they're going on a rampage about Donald Trump, about how ridiculous he is to suggest our elections are being rigged. Remember that old saying, none dare call it treason, or rather, treason doth never prosper. Why? Because if it prospers, none dare call it treason. If we have an entire political class that has won their office through election fraud, they're never going to call attention or admit to election fraud going on. That illusion of honest elections is what holds the American people in place and compliant with going along with whatever the oligarchs happen to want.
So our only hope is to have him win by a landslide at this point.
At this point, and we also need to sweep out the Congress from all the incumbents, the Deadwood, the Israel Firsters, and absolutely give him a Congress that's going to work with him. But we know from all that's been going on, the primaries, the hack on my server right now as we speak, the other side loves to cheat. They love to play dirty. And they've got the money and the resources to try and force their will on everybody. And again, they've got my server locked up so that nobody can read the truth. And it basically shows these people do not respect the Bill of Rights. They do not respect freedom of speech and an open debate on the ideas. In fact, every time they attack my server, it's basically an admission. They know they couldn't win a free and open debate about what's going on. I need to take a minute here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network at this point. And we're talking about politics, and we're talking about the fact that the other side is playing dirty. There's a wonderful movie called Our Brand is Crisis. I think I mentioned it yesterday. Sandra Bullock. It's making the rounds on cable. And in the middle of this whole movie, she's making a speech to all the people working on the campaign, in which she says, the only sin is losing. And that really is the attitude of Hillary's supporters. They think they're above the law, that they shouldn't have to be moral or ethical or fair. It's, this is war and all's fair in war, and they just want to get their person in there. And her tantrum squad right now, I mean, they're one of the heaviest attacks we've had to weather. And all they're doing is proving that they know they've lost on a battleground of ideas. So they have to cheat, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Wow. Well, thank you, Michael. Keep up the good work. I'm a religious follower of yours, so God bless you for what you do.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the phone call and the kind words. Now then, let's get on to the issue of Hillary Clinton's health. This is getting to be a serious issue, and before we get into this, I need to caution you that we all need to tread very carefully here. Because, again, the other side loves dirty tricks, and we need to be on the lookout for them. We need to be prepared to deal with them. A little bit more about that in just a little while here. Now, article coming out from Natural News. Hillary Clinton's health in rapid collapse. Voters in shock after photos show her unable to walk up small flight of stairs. And by the way, we just got another photo surfaced from one of her campaign stops in Florida where she's talking to the crowd, and literally there is somebody holding her by her arm to keep her from falling over. It's a serious, serious, serious problem. There's something going on here. Now, we need to avoid speculation and guessing. Guessing is going to make things worse, but let's go with what is absolutely provable. And one of the most important documents we have that Hillary may be, in fact, dealing with some serious mental issues is one of the emails pried loose by Judicial Watch, in which Hillary's top aide, Huma Abedin, is advising State Department employees they have to be metaphorically holding her hand while she's talking to foreign leaders. Because according to Huma Abedin herself in this email, Hillary is often confused. So let's look at the tally board of everything that we know about Hillary based on statements from Hillary's people. According to FBI Director James Comey, she's reckless, negligent, and careless. According to Huma Abedin, she gets confused. According to Hillary herself, she gets brain short circuits. There's something going on here that we need to be taking care of. We need to be paying attention to this. Now, there's an article over here in John Rappaport chastising the corporate media for trying to cover up Hillary's health questions. And it's one thing when you hide John F. Kennedy's back injury from PT 109, or the fact that Roosevelt had polio, because it didn't diminish his mental faculties. It's quite another when you hide the fact that Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's in office and Hillary seems to have problems going into the election. It's a disservice to the nation as a whole. It's, in fact, insane. But this is what the corporate media does. They're covering up. Now, we have a listener, and this listener is a medical student. And he sent some interesting information about Hillary's constant nodding and bobbing of her head. In fact, they're making jokes about the Hillary Clinton bobblehead doll. And he says, basically, from what he knows, she may have aortic insufficiency, meaning there's not enough blood getting to the important parts of the brain. And he says he assesses her to have a manifestation called Demusset's sign, which is the rhythmic bobbing on an individual's head. And he says, what is important is the timing, because if the bobbing is synchronized to the heart rate, then it's a heart condition. If it is not synchronized to the heart rate, it's another symptom of Parkinson's disease. And a lot of people are thinking that might be what's going on. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this very large, very handsome gentleman who is always with her, holding her up, the one who leapt off onto the podium and told her to keep talking following that disturbance at a rally. And it was at first assumed he was Secret Service, except that he physically doesn't fit the model of a Secret Service protective detail agent. And the speculation is he's actually a doctor. And he's been tentatively identified as Dr. Okunola of the Neurology Group, Neuroscience Center of Northern New Jersey. And if this is the guy, he's a leader in his field. He specializes in epilepsy, clinical neurophysiology, and sleep medicine. And there was a photo of him carrying what seems to be a diazepam pen, which is an emergency measure to deal with seizures. There's a lot of smoke there we need to be careful about. Now, it's important to point out, when you're watching what's going on the campaign trail, Donald Trump doesn't need any help walking up or down stairs. He's not falling down constantly. He's very healthy. He's obviously very healthy. And it's rather interesting to hear Hillary's supporters screaming about getting Donald Trump's tax returns when Hillary Clinton refuses flat out to release her medical records. I don't know, maybe they were stored on Lois Lerner's hard drive or something silly like that. But they absolutely do not want to release her medical records. Why? What's in there? Now, here's another very telling indicator. Hillary has only 3 scheduled appearances between now and October 19th. Just 3. In the final months of the campaign, she's got only 3 scheduled appearances. Trump is doing at least 1, if not 2, rallies every single day. Now, one of the things that's floating around the net right now, and I want to treat this cautiously, they are images of what are purported to be leaked Hillary Clinton leaked Hillary Clinton medical records from Dr. Lisa Bardock, who is one of Hillary's doctors. In fact, Hillary insisted Lisa Bardock was the one who said that she was fit to do the campaign. Now, the letters show us everything we expect to see. And so I want to do a word of caution. We don't know for a fact these came from Lisa Bardock. It doesn't have the letterhead of the medical institute she works for. Of course, it's a personal record, and maybe they don't want to spend the money on letterhead. There's no confirmation. And remember, the essence of a really good hoax is it shows you exactly what you want to see. And at this point, we need to be concerned about an effort by Hillary's campaign to poison the well, to see these documents out there and everybody grabs them and puts them on the front page and says, oh, see, we've got the proof. And then they come on out and say, oh, no, it was a hoax. See, these bozos, they're grabbing at everything. There's nothing to this Hillary health nonsense whatsoever. So we need to be very, very cautious. And it's almost too good to be true. And yes, at my age, I'm a cynic. But given the reality of life in the United States of America, no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. Now, sharp-eyed people noticed something very interesting at one of the Hillary rallies down in Florida. Apparently, the father of the accused shooter at the Orlando nightclub was sitting right behind Hillary at the Kissimmee rally. And it was on camera. Everybody saw it. He's laughing. He's grinning. He's having a really good time. The Hillary campaign is already trying to distance themselves from this, saying they had no idea he was there. It's not our fault, so forth and so on. Now, let's talk about Dan Bongino. He is a former member of the Presidential Protective Detail for the Secret Service. And he's studied psychology. He's got a lot of qualifications. He's now running as a Republican to be a member of Congress. And he's directing a simple question at all these members of the GOP who are leaping on to support Hillary Clinton. And he's saying, are you crazy? And it's a valid question to ask, because Fox News just did a story just before we went to airtime about how 50 top GOP members are saying Trump would be reckless as president. Really? I thought that's what FBI Director James Comey said Hillary was. And they're grasping at straws. And Donald Trump came on out and he said what we've been saying as well. He's running against the insiders. This election in November is not about Republican versus Democrat or liberal versus conservative. It is about the American people against a corrupt, entrenched elite who hold on to wealth and power through dirty tricks, through fraudulent elections, through hacking people's servers. That's what this election is really about. The oligarchs against the ordinary people. Now, yesterday there was a story, a video came on out about a raid into a union office, which was a very much pro-Hillary place. They had banners all over, and it was Hillary president, and the police are taking boxes of documents out there. And as it turns out, the FBI seized a truckload of financial records from this Philadelphia area labor union, which supports Hillary Clinton. More when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And I was just answering a listener email saying we need to start extrapolating forward on Hillary's possible mental deterioration. I mean, what happens if she succeeds in stealing the White House and her brain just isn't there anymore? And kind of as a humorous reference, I was pointing back to another movie called Dave, It's about this guy who is a celebrity lookalike for the president, and he gets hired to play the president when the real president suffers a stroke. Now, I don't think they would try and do something that ridiculous, but the very obvious situation would be, and again, this comes from the very last years of Roosevelt's life, where his condition was deteriorating, and he basically just sat back and let his advisors run the country. And that could very easily be a situation here. Hillary's a puppet. Doesn't matter if the puppet has a brain or not. She's just going to sit in the Oval Office and drool on the Resolute desk, and the country's actually going to be run by all of her financial backers off the edge of a cliff. So it is an important issue. We need to know about that. Now, getting on back to this FBI raid. They raided this Philadelphia area union, which is Clinton supporters, and apparently there's some kind of a major fraud and corruption investigation going on. And the reason it's embarrassing is the suspects in question are very closely tied to Hillary Clinton. Now, down in the campaign trail, let's see, in the Daytona Arena, Donald Trump drew 8,000 supporters. And Hillary was struggling just to get 300. Now, this disparity between crowds has become a major problem for Hillary because it doesn't jibe with all of the media saying, Hillary is leading by double digits. She's out there. You've got to support Hillary. She's the winner. You don't want to vote for a loser. And now the Hillary campaign has been caught photoshopping images of her rallies. The photo that was put out for her rally yesterday was so badly photoshopped, it doesn't even match the venue anymore. It's sloppy work. It's not as sloppy as we saw Mitt Romney's people doing, where they were just slapdashing that stuff together, but it's still sloppy work. So they're resorting to, again, more fraud. They think it's their divine right because she's a presidential candidate. We're allowed to cheat. We're running for high office in this country. That's just the American way, you people. Okay, so let's see here real quick. Do a little something over here. Now then, as you know, there's been a big stink coming up over the fact that Hillary Clinton has now publicly maligned some of the family members of the people who died in Benghazi. And it was going back and forth, Pat Smith, rest of it. Now Pat Smith and Charles Woods have filed a defamation lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and a wrongful death lawsuit following the revelation from the Pentagon that there were forces close by that could have intervened to save the lives of these people, and they were never contacted by the State Department. And Hillary Clinton has publicly stated, we couldn't save them, there was nobody close enough. And the Pentagon is out there saying, yeah, we were there. We had forces ready to go. Now, one of the reasons my server is being pounded probably has to do with the Clinton dead bodies list, which is coming back to haunt them because of the numerous recent additions over the last couple of weeks. And it's actually starting to get coverage in what we would consider more establishment venues. And over at townhall.com, they wrote a very cautious, treading carefully article, basically saying there are questions about these deaths. And they're saying it's entirely possible that all of these deaths are just coincidental and unrelated to the campaign, but there are just simply too many of them. They've whacked so many people, it's called attention to itself. And now even the establishment is having to address this issue. There's something weird going on there. Now, I notice every time they talk about John Ash, they're leaving out an important part of the story, and it's probably intentional. Because John Ash was a major, major problem for the Clintons. When we come back from this commercial, I will explain more. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. We've got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but I want to finish up on this Clinton body count list, which is starting to now be dealt with by some of the more establishment-oriented media venues. And they're talking about the recent additions, and John Ash is of particular interest, but virtually every place where I've seen John Ash's story being reported, they're leaving out a critical component. Now, even this story that was over in the townhall.com was acknowledging that Ash was first initially reported as dead of a heart attack. Then word got out his throat had been crushed, so the official story changed to he accidentally dropped a barbell on his own throat, which is a plot line from an old Columbo episode. And he died just before he was going to be testifying in this bribery case that he was all tangled up with. He's a former United Nations official, and he got caught up in this bribery mess with this Chinese billionaire, Ng Lak Seng. And he was about to testify on the Clinton connections to Ng Lak Seng. And the reason that's significant is back in 1996, at the height of the Chinagate scandal, Ng Lak Seng was the source of the money funneled into Bill Clinton's re-election campaign through Charlie Tree. At the same time, Bill Clinton was authorizing the sale of very sensitive U.S. technology to China over the objections of the Pentagon and the intelligence community. And why that is germane today ties into that private email server and the Clinton Charitable Foundation. Because we know the Clintons are recycling a lot of their scams and crimes from Little Rock, Arkansas, just on a larger scale in Washington, D.C. And it is a legitimate question to be asking. If Hillary Clinton was selling secrets to foreign governments using her weak private email server and collecting and laundering the payments through that charitable foundation, which only spends 10% of its money on charity, and according to Charles Ortel, billions have vanished in there without a trace. Now, had Ash testified about Clintons being linked to Ng Lak Seng, that was going to open up a big can of worms nobody wanted opened up. All right, let's go to the phones here. Cashman in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, thanks for taking my call. I've been listening to you for about a year, and I'd really like to thank you for educating America on what's going on. Mike, I had a question for you. What's the easiest way to steal money from a bank?
Own it.
Exactly. Mike, what really upsets me and any American that's got a conscience is when they gave the bank $700 billion bailout. The question I have is why couldn't they cut the taxes for us hardworking Americans and give us a break one time instead of giving it to the billionaires that didn't deserve it?
Well, because the billionaires write really big campaign checks, and that's all that really matters. The reality is, from an economics point of view, everything the government did following the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud was exactly the wrong thing to do. Instead of taking trillions of dollars away from the American people and giving it to the bankers, had they gone to the bankers who had committed criminal fraud and said, give us the money here, and given it back to the American people, we could have avoided this whole recession. People wouldn't have missed a payment on their mortgage. There wouldn't have been a housing crisis. People wouldn't have missed a payment on the credit card. There wouldn't have been a credit crisis. People would have had money to go down to the shopping malls to buy products, hopefully made in America. There wouldn't have been a retail crisis, which is still ongoing, and a manufacturing crisis, which is still ongoing. But the government is firmly on board with the financial interest, which is Mussolini's definition of what fascism is. And everything they did was all about enriching their friends and cronies on Wall Street in exchange for generous campaign donations come election year. And look at the money Wall Street's pouring all over Hillary Clinton.
I know, Mike, it's a disgrace. And, I'm a little over 50. In this election, I've never seen such craziness in the amount of propaganda and nonsense that's going on. Of course, I'm a Trump supporter. This is the biggest election of my time, like you probably said in your time. This is the biggest election, and America is cringing on the very last hopes of being what we would think our freedoms hold on to.
Well, we're definitely in some times of dramatic change and turmoil, and I have no doubt that somewhere down the road there'll be books and movies about this election season, just like they made a couple of movies about what happened down in Florida in 2000. But it is, in my life experience, I'm a little older than you are, it's the dirtiest election I've ever seen. It's also the most visible election in terms of the machinations of the political parties and the propaganda of the corporate media. And that's actually a good thing, because the American people are waking up and realizing that it really is all a fraud and a sham. And that, I think, is going to get them very, very angry. In fact, I'm seeing more than a few commentators talking about how this obvious media propaganda to sell us Hillary Clinton is probably going to backlash and result in the media's credibility crashing even more. People are just turning off from all this nonsense that's coming out of the corporate media.
You have mentioned the independent media, Mike. That's exactly where I go. There's no longer that I watch any televised corporate media. There's just no way I can handle the lies anymore. But I'm going to leave you with one point and let you continue the great show that you do.
Thank you.
I had an English teacher my freshman year told me, and he was a very smart guy. I know it was a state-funded school, but I still got my diploma. But he told me, and it's always stuck with me, that I, later on in life, would be my best educator ever to read and research and make sure that I found out the facts myself. And he was no more right than this year right now and throughout my life. Mike, once again, thanks for having me, and we'll talk later down the road. Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much for the kind words. And, even within the state-controlled, state-sponsored schools, every once in a while you do get a really, really good teacher. I had a few during my educational background that I recall with a great deal of fondness, and this guy sounds like he was really, really good. All right, so thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to get on back to the news here. Now, Hillary Clinton, over the campaign trail, keeps flipping and flopping on various issues, but there is one that she seems rather consistent on, and that's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Absolutely is on board with that. Somebody put together a collection of 45 different times when Hillary Clinton said that she was supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is this big corporate internationalist giveaway. And Donald Trump is correct to point out, if you want to see an example of what's going to happen under a Hillary Clinton economy, just go look at Detroit. Because what happened to Detroit, from the offshoring of the jobs, the loss of manufacturing, that's going to happen here. Because that's what the TPP and TTIP is all about. Creating one giant globe where the corporations are free to go to wherever the workers can be abused and paid the least and make products and unrestrictedly sell them anywhere else. There's a major flaw with that theory, of course. Because if you take away all the jobs in a wealthy country, then it stops being wealthy and they can't buy the products. But nobody is really maintaining that global overview anymore. And that is its biggest failing. Now, Donald Trump has declared war on the globalist media, and he vows to fight the rigged election. And, of course, everybody who's in office by means of a rigged election or hopes to be in office by means of a rigged election are out there saying, you're being ridiculous. How could you say our elections are crooked? And, of course, history's against them. Huey P. Long, the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, Kennedy stealing it from Nixon. Vote scam, blackboxvoting.org, hacking democracy. How much more do you need? Our elections are rigged, and we need to deal with that. Now, out in San Diego, as you know, was one of the many lawsuits filed regarding the Democratic primaries. And to show you how corrupt the system really is, a Superior Court judge in San Diego admitted that the vote in San Diego County wasn't properly audited. And it could have easily been fraudulent, errors going unnoticed. Said, yeah, it was handled very, very bad. He admits it. The election was wide open to fraud because it wasn't being properly audited. Then he goes on to say he cannot grant any relief because the state of California has already certified the election as fair and accurate and honest. In other words, the Superior Court judge came out and said, Hillary stole it fair and square and there's nothing you can do about it. That's where we are right now. I want to bring back to your memory Amber Lyon, former CNN journalist, has won an Emmy Award, and she went public not too long ago on CNN's rather shady, underhanded practices, admitting CNN is paid by the U.S. government to report certain ways on events. They're paid to not report on other things, like Hillary's health. The Obama administration pays CNN for content control. It's all bought and paid for in the corporate media. And remember, all the way back in 2000, it came on out that military personnel from the 4th Psychological Operations Group were working in CNN's headquarters in Atlanta. CNN is the biggest of the ministries of propaganda. That's what they do. Now, sometimes the media messes up. As you know, the message that the corporate media is putting on out there is Hillary's ahead, she's winning, you don't want to vote for a loser. And they're really pushing it. So over at NBC, they ran up a story showing that Hillary is ahead of Donald Trump by 46% to 43%. Not quite the double digits a lot of other people are claiming, but still, Hillary's ahead. Then they had their own online poll at the bottom of the page. And as of the last time I checked, Hillary only had 13%. And once again, we ran our daily, if the elections were held today, who would you vote for? Once again, Donald Trump in a landslide. It's just a giant hoax. You got to stop listening to that corporate media. They're there to sell you the next president of the United States of America, and that's a product you do not want to buy. Another article that came out, this is from Investment Watch blog, 538 has been caught rigging their polling system over the last week to manufacture a fake post-DNC bump for Clinton. You would think polling would be a very straightforward situation. Go on out, talk to a bunch of people, tally the results, and post them. But no. There's all these statistical manipulations and filtering, and they literally put a bias in there. There's a fudge factor in there. And all they have to do is change the fudge factor, and they get the results they want. These public corporate media polls are not designed to measure public opinion. They're designed to manufacture it. They're relying on the herd instinct. That if you are told 9 out of 10 of your neighbors are voting for Hillary Clinton, you'll just go along and vote for Hillary Clinton because you don't want to be out of step with the rest of the flock. But something I learned when I was a farm kid all those years ago in New Hampshire, if you're following the flock, you are going to step in poo. And I don't think you want to do that. The independent polls are still showing Trump leading by roughly 60 points. Quite a disparity. Let's grab a phone call here. Mo in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. And I got a question, but every time you talk about walking with your gun hunting, I mean, I grew up that way in Nebraska. I'm the same age as you. And,
you have my deepest sympathies.
You're younger than me by a year. But, I grew up that way. We used to take pheasant sandwiches for lunch in school. It was just a great life. Nobody stopped you walking along with your shotgun on the road.
Mm-hmm.
We were safe. But anyways, I mean, I feel like a kindred spirit with you there. But I got to tell you this. First of all, I think unless they take him out, I think Trump's going to win by the biggest landslide in U.S. history, going by just general information out there. So they can't even rig it enough to do that. And you're a big part of it. Definitely, you and shows like yours.
It's going to be like the Brexit. They're going to try and steal it, and they're probably going to come up short because they can't push it too far without everybody knowing that's what they did.
Yeah, Brexit was from 48 to 52.
Hang on. We seem to be having a lot of problems with our phone system today. A lot of garbling. So I'm going to ask you to talk just a little bit slower so that we can understand what you're saying. And before I let you get back to talking, I'm trying to make this idea go viral, and that is on Election Day, if every single person who votes for Donald Trump wears a little T made out of tape. We're not selling anything. We're not asking you to buy buttons or anything. Just get some masking tape and put a T on the outside of your clothing. And that's going to make a stolen election look really, really obvious. And we need to make this idea go viral. And Yeah. Anyway, what else did you want to say?
No, that's a fantastic idea. No, I was just saying I think it's going to be a landslide. I think it will be the biggest in U.S. history, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And I was crediting you and shows like yours. But my question is this. I'm the guy that lives 8 blocks from the synagogue or the mosque where this guy, the shooter, supposedly went. And, I go by it every day. It's right on the end of my street.
Yes.
But what I don't understand is, I got a son that lives in Orlando. What I don't understand is this father of this supposedly shooter. I'm sure he was the shooter in some extent. Whether they triggered it by raiding the place, but when they came in and like a Waco thing. But my question is, this guy's sitting behind Hillary, and it was on. I think somebody on Fox News. I watched part of it today where they mentioned that nobody sits on that prominent position, the right or left of the candidate. It's not vetted and done for a reason. And this guy was interviewed later. They caught up with him, and he hates gays. That God's going to punish him. And Hillary ignored the question with what? Is this the most bizarre thing? What's going on? What do you think that's about?
Well, Hillary, again, this gets back to the issue that Hillary, being an insider establishment politician, really cannot talk about the issues that affect all of our lives. Trump can, because he's an outsider. He can talk about the economy, he can talk about the wars, he can talk about rigged elections. Hillary can't. She's constrained. And so Hillary is trying to fan up fringe issues, gay rights.
Mike, can I interject just one thing? Listen, I don't like to interrupt you because usually you're right on point. My point is the biggest killer in the history of the United States, the biggest one mass shooter killer. He holds the Guinness World Book of Record in the United States for the most people killed, 58, whatever. He is in a prominent position behind the so-called leader of the presidential.
Okay, we're gonna have to let you go for the commercial, and I'll reply when we come back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to that last caller's question. And we had addressed this earlier in the show, where the guy was just sitting behind Hillary at this rally, smiling, having a good time, and it does look sort of weird that this gentleman would be allowed into the rally by the Secret Service Protective Detail. But the Hillary campaign is taking the position they didn't know he was there, and that's just all there is to it. But I guess at this point, they're so desperate to get anybody into the Hillary rallies, they'll let anybody in who's got a pulse, or maybe even not a pulse. But it does look weird, but we've got more important things to talk about. Now, somebody did an interesting little social experiment, and they went on out, and they conducted man on the street, woman on the street interviews, where they basically started with some of Donald Trump's quotes, but they said they're quotes by Hillary. And Clinton supporters all nodded and said, oh, yes, if that's what Hillary says, absolutely. And then, of course, he turns around and says, well, actually, that was Donald Trump. And they go, you can't do that. You're harming my God, as it were. Now, Bill Maher, as you know, is a very popular host on TV and very liberal-oriented. And he had an interview with Julian Assange where Maher was out there basically trying to sell this link between Donald Trump and Russia and Julian Assange, accusing Assange of backing the wrong puppet. At which point Assange turned around and asked him about the $1 million donation Bill Maher had made to a Hillary-linked political group, at which point Bill Maher backed off and said, oh, no, that was a donation I made to Obama, and there was nothing questioned about that. I was basically showing how you can donate lots of money after the Citizens United decision. But as it turns out, the campaign records do show somebody named William Maher in Los Angeles made a $1 million donation to Hillary's a Hillary-associated PAC. And there are only 3 Bill Mahers in the phone book in that area. And the other 2 don't have $1 million to throw. So it looks like Bill Maher got caught lying to his audience, something his audience ought to be keeping in mind as we go into the future. Now, as you know, they're trying to drag out anybody who will give Hillary Clinton an endorsement, and sometimes it's not working out as well as they would like. And we're talking here about the former deputy head of the CIA, Michael Morell, who's financially tied in with one of Hillary Clinton's main gatekeepers and information controllers. And he was out there saying Hillary's bad, blah, 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 and the rest of it. Donald Trump is denouncing Morell as a total Clinton flunky, which is absolutely true. But what's worth looking at are some of the other positions Morell has been promoting. He's out there openly advocating that we should start killing Russians and Iranians and just go after Assad right now. And Morell worked with Clinton when she was Secretary of State. They're all hand in glove. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And getting on back to the news here, getting a little update about this father of the Orlando shooter, Sadiq Mateen, who was seated directly behind Hillary Clinton at her rally yesterday just south of Orlando. And apparently he has, to whatever extent any individual citizen can, given Hillary Clinton his full endorsement. I'm not sure that's really going to work all that well. Now, a lot of eyes are on Wisconsin. They're having their elections today, and Paul Ryan has a slim lead over his opponent going into the election. And we'll see what happens when it's all over. But the expectation is that his position within the GOP is in serious, serious trouble. Even if he manages to return to Congress, he is not going to be the power that he once was. His primary challenger, Paul Nehlen, is out there saying Paul Ryan basically tried to hijack the U.S. system. And yes, he did, along with the leadership of the Republican Party, trying to keep Donald Trump out. Now, over on Fox News, and as corrupted and controlled as the corporate media's prostitutes and correspondents are, sometimes even it gets to be too much for them. And over on Fox News, they were interviewing Debbie Wasserman Schultz about her recent resignation from the Democratic National Committee and how she felt about being booed. And she came out and said, oh, they weren't booing me, they were cheering me. And at that point, the Fox News host just broke into laughter. It's like that guy at the State Department who said, welcome to an exercise in transparent democracy, and then he cracks up. They all know it's a joke. Now, WikiLeaks, which is in the news a lot right now, has just offered a $20,000 reward for information that leads to the conviction of whoever it was who murdered Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich. Now, Seth Rich worked in IT, and he was gunned down near his home. The police are saying it was a robbery, but nothing was taken. His family thinks something else was going on. Now, the reason I bring this up, first of all, if you have information, there's a $20,000 reward there. But I have been wondering all along, we know there's this rush to blame Russia for the DNC email hack. It's Russia, it's Russia, it's Russia. No evidence for it whatsoever. Julian Assange has come on out and said it wasn't Russia, it was an internal leak. And I'm wondering if that internal leak was, in fact, Seth Rich. Because the timing between his murder and the WikiLeaks email dump, it's a little too close. And when you're dealing with politics at that level of society, there are no coincidences whatsoever. So it's something to keep an eye on over there. Okay, getting on to the war zones. Russia has just pulled out all the plugs over in Syria. They're describing it as breaking the backbone of international terrorism in Syria. This is coming from Forces Commander Colonel General Viktor Bondarev. And they're basically just pounding them into the dust. And the duplicity is on full display because a story coming out of activistpost.com, there are now photographs confirming British special forces are in Syria protecting the terrorists. And that's going to be very embarrassing for Great Britain. See, they got trapped by their own lie. 5 years ago it was, we're going to get Assad. He's evil. He's bad. He tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting. He sings off key. And then when Americans started saying, you know, this is really the problem for the Syrian people to go on out. And then the U.S. changed the story. Oh, we're not really making war on Syria. We're there because ISIS and Al-Qaeda are in Syria, and there's a war on terror, and we have a right to bomb any country where we think ISIS and Al-Qaeda happens to be. So they started bombing Syria again. They kept missing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, kept hitting critical Syrian economic infrastructure. And that's when Syria asked the Russians to come on in. And Syria and Russia working together have pretty much kicked the U.S.-backed terrorist groups out. We're on the verge of seeing this generation's version of Vietnam. And the U.S. is scrambling. I mean, some of the stuff Secretary of State John Kerry's been saying, he's demanding that Russia and Syria stop attacking our terrorists. It's not up to you, John. You don't have any business being in Syria. Russia is there at the permission and invitation of the legitimate Syrian government. The United States is not. Now, the latest WikiLeaks revelation, more came out last night, is confirming Hillary Clinton's close association with this cleric, Gulen. And Assange is basically claiming this latest dump proves Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, sold weapons to ISIS in Syria. At the same time, the U.S. government was telling you ISIS was this horrible enemy that cut off people's heads in these really sloppy special effects shows. And if you think about it, that's an act of treason. Treason is defined as giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. We've all been told by the government that we're at war with ISIS, and Hillary Clinton was selling them weapons. That's treason. And I'm sure what we're going to hear from FBI Director James Comey is, well, she didn't mean to do wrong, so we're just going to give her a pass. Over in Turkey, people are, observers, if you will, are very, very nervous. Putin and Erdogan are meeting, and basically Turkey's relations with the U.S. are the worst in 50 years, which is the sort of thing that's going to happen when you get caught trying to kick the government out, which the U.S. has been doing to multiple nations since the end of World War II. And Turkey is clearly ready to pivot to Russia. Now, Turkey has issued a statement to the U.S. government that the U.S. shouldn't sacrifice their alliance with Turkey over this Muslim cleric, Fethullah Gulen. Now, this puts the U.S. between a rock and a hard place, because Fethullah Gulen is linked to the CIA, now linked to Hillary Clinton, and if he's returned to Turkey, he will be made to talk and put on display as proof to the world of the U.S. government's ongoing treachery against even nations they call their friends. Erdogan is basically saying if he doesn't get Gulen, then the alliance with the U.S. is off, and they're going to pivot to Russia. And Turkey is a keystone in U.S. power projection into that part of the world. I think we can expect that Gulen is going to accidentally drop a barbell on his own throat at some point in the very, very near future. And they'll ship the body back for a wonderful, wonderful state funeral. But it really is an awkward situation. Okay. Now then, getting on down to Afghanistan, things just got really kind of messed up there. ISIS and the Taliban have declared a truce. See, the U.S. was trying to do to Afghanistan what they did in Syria. We're going to send in ISIS, and ISIS is opposing the people, and therefore we have to go on in. And what happened in Afghanistan, ISIS and Taliban have declared a truce. They are united to fight the U.S.-backed forces still trying to control Afghanistan. There's a reason Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. And we're about to learn that one more time. Now, let's talk about this $400 million that went down to Iran, because that story is really stinking to high heaven. And apparently, according to this article that came out of Investment Watch blog, the Obama administration tried to hide the $400 million cash payment to Iran from Congress. Tried to hide it. And it really did act like drug dealers. They didn't send a bank transfer. They didn't send a cashier's check. They literally took currency, foreign currency, euros and Swiss francs, wrapped them up in plastic, put them on a pallet on an unmarked airplane to send in there. They didn't want to use U.S. dollars. They were trying to basically hide that this was going on. The State Department is refusing to comment on statements by one of the 4 hostages that they were held on the runway by Iran until after the money plane arrived. The U.S. government's still taking the position, it's just a coincidence that it happened at the same time. No, this was all above board. This was very, very legitimate. Yeah, if it was legitimate, explain the wrapped cash on the pallets. That's the part that I don't get. Now, there's an article from FortRuss.com talking about the ramping up of the rhetoric regarding Russia. And we've all seen it. Not just Russia, but China as well. What we're getting from the corporate media and from the government is Russia's bad, we must go to war with Russia, war. And they're pointing out how Hillary Clinton is fully on board this. The Russian threat, the blaming of Russia for the DNC email leak. Clinton has made a statement that the United States has come to its moment of truth. I'm wondering how she can say the word truth without her head exploding. Okay, the Tantrum Squad is back at my server again. Well, I guess if you can't get a job working at a McDonald's, being one of Hillary's tech goons is probably adequate. Apparently, an Israeli drone crashed into an Arab village in northern Israel. It wounded 13 people and set an empty home ablaze. Nobody knows if it was deliberate or not, but it did cause a lot of damage. Now, turning to the economy, the deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal came on out about Donald Trump's speech on the economy, saying it was excellent. And he's talking about all the things that are necessary to bring the economy back from the abyss that it's being shoved into by the Wall Street money junkies and their obedient people over on the Hillary campaign. And Hillary's already out there with her economic plan. What is it? Higher taxes, more socialism. Now, the result of all of these decades of Democratic agenda and politics that we've been seeing, things are not good in this country. And the lies are not holding people in place anymore about how great the economy is here. Right now, there's a study that just came out, shows 81% of Americans are now worse off than they were in 2005. And this is a trend around the world, as the world sinks into central bank fascism. Now, America's standard of living has actually been in decline going all the way back to the 1980s when we began to lose our manufacturing and they tried to prop up the economy with the so-called service economy, which was this idea that we could run a nation by doing each other's laundry for a fee, which certainly opened up more taxation opportunities for the government. But it didn't bring any new wealth in from outside because we didn't have anything to sell. We're selling services. We don't need services. I can do my own laundry. H.H. Gregg is starting to close their stores. The retail crisis is moving on, as I mentioned earlier. And apparently Lockheed Martin is giving indications that they're going to shut down their plant that makes the F-16 and may ship that manufacturing operation to India. Now, one of Donald Trump's points in his economy is to change the incentivization of offshoring. Remember, going all the way back to George W. Bush, the U.S. tax code actually encourages corporations to take their high-paying jobs to other countries. All we need to do is change the laws to reverse that, to say if you're doing your work in the other countries, there's a tariff. Your money will be taxed at twice the rate. Build an incentive structure that brings the jobs back home. That's what Donald Trump wants to do, and it makes a lot of sense. Unless your goal is to drive the U.S. down into third world poverty, to make it easier to drop the borders with Russia and Canada. Story coming out of the Express over in Great Britain. The Eurozone was flawed right from the very beginning. I agree, because of that built-in self-destruct device called the European Central Bank. And this article goes on to say it is time to ditch that euro, which is always loaned out at interest by the European Central Bank. The Europeans are okay with being a bloc, a union. The parts they have problems with is the economic predations of the private central bankers and this open borders policy. Without those two, the EU would be a really, really good idea. Now, Greece is once again trying to remind Germany that at the close of World War II, Greece wrote off Germany's debt to Greece. And they're saying now's the time to return the favor. And, of course, what they're getting from Merkel is absolutely not. Absolutely not. It really is out of control over there. Italy has given the green light to yet another referendum, which could take the European Union apart. And apparently, Italian companies that are sick and tired of all the EU rules are expressing their anger by flying the British flag to protest EU meddling. And I need to do a momentary shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, along with a shout-out to the Tantrum Squad, which is really on overtime trying to kick my server down. And like I said before, anytime they do that to my server, anybody's server, they are confessing before the world they could not possibly win a free and open debate. So they have to cheat. That's what they're saying. We want to win. We don't have any good ideas. We're corrupt. We're criminal. So we're just going to cheat to get what we want. And along with all these people who are defacing Trump signs and shooting Trump supporters and everything, take a look at the public face of Hillary Clinton supporters, because they're fully on display. These are not nice people. These are not nice people. They're spoiled, rotten. They've got an unshakable sense of entitlement. They're playing to that whole victimhood thing. I'm a victim of, well, I don't know what I'm a victim of, but I'm entitled to free things because I'm a victim. Meanwhile, over in Germany, the migrant rape crisis continues to spin out of control. It's now described as a Germany-wide phenomenon. It is not merely confined to areas around the refugee centers. This is according to Andre Schultz, who's the head of the Association of Criminal Police. It's an absolute disaster over there. Meanwhile, over in Britain, UKIP's leadership candidate is calling for a ban on the Muslim veil in public spaces, which is not going to actually solve any problems at all. It's simply a way for a politician to look like he's doing something about the problem, without actually doing something about the problem, like closing the borders. Meanwhile, over in Sweden, those Swedes who are wealthy enough to afford a second home, which is actually very common over there. You have your residence where you live and work most of the year, and then a lot of Swedes have little mountain cabins, vacation homes. They're now being strongly pressured to allow the refugees to live in their second homes. It is a mess. Now then, little bit of a story. This is a YouTube video. Google in the White House. Julian Assange is warning everybody of the very close ties between Hillary Clinton and Google, which probably explains why so many of the Google servers are being used for these attacks on my server. Because we trap the IPs, and huge numbers of them go back to the Google network. And remember, it was only a day or two ago, Google got called out for erasing Palestine from their maps. It's not there anymore. It's all Israel. Google hath declared it is all Israel. So they're proving to the world they have their own agenda. They're not unbiased. All right, we've got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple of headlines just crossing my desk. Apparently, Sears and Kmart have just closed nearly 80 stores. The whole consumer economy is collapsing. Why? Because the wise rulers of our nation have forgotten that for an economy to continue, there must be some mechanism by which the wealth that is accumulated at the top finds its way back down to the bottom as decent wages and salaries. They seem to have forgotten that. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Brendan in Northern California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just wanted to encourage other callers. You have a very diverse group of people that are listening, and I'm hoping that we can encourage people to call in with, I'm calling it connect the dots kind of either volunteering theories, because I spend a lot of time thinking about these events, and I try to come up with my own conclusions, but I think that based on the different types of callers that are out there, I want to encourage people to call in and maybe offer suggestions or thoughts and ideas that might be a little bit outside the box. And the other thing is, one quick comment, and I'll take your answer off the phone, is there any way that we could get Donald Trump to pledge, as the young Republicans once did, to hold the Republicans' feet to the fire, basically where they signed on? I think it was more towards birth rights or whatnot, but can we get Trump to just lock him down on several key issues and just hold him to it? Because I'm a little bit on the fence, and there's some stuff coming out of that camp that's got my head spinning, and I'll take your answer off the air.
Well, that's a very, very hard question. This idea of trying to constrain groups of people based on party loyalty used to get a lot more traction than it does today. So I think Donald Trump would be better advised to stay focused on the issues, focused on Hillary. I mean, Hillary has taken the campaign into negative space, and that's where it's going to be fought from pretty much here till election day. Of course, once Trump wins, or to be more accurate, once we prevent Hillary from stealing the White House, he's basically going to be the position that defines what the Republican Party is all about. And I think what we'll see happen is those Republicans who were willing to work with him during the primaries are going to be listened to, and those Republicans who were firmly in the war party and pro-Israel camp are probably going to be put out on the fringes or out to pasture. So I don't really have a clean answer for that, but right now it's important to stay focused on the key issues and not let ourselves get distracted off into other areas of discussion. Anyway, we're going to switch over here now to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Aloha, Michael.
Aloha.
Say that 10 times fast. Go figure.
You ought to try the name of our state fish, the Huma Huma Nuku Nuku Wapua. Say that 10 times fast.
I'm not even going to attempt to. I don't care how much I've had to drink. Aside from that, but nice try, though. Two quick things. One, you said about how the various corporations are shutting down the various businesses like Kmart, or what was the other one, Target, or whatever have you.
Sears.
I don't remember exactly. One, they're doing it because they don't care, for that matter. It depends on how much money they can funnel into their own pocket at the cost of the everyday person. Now, the question I have is, it's going to seem like a bone to pick with you. When you mentioned about entitlement, what do you define as an entitlement?
Generally, again, it's a gray area. There are certainly segments of our society who need assistance, like our homeless veterans and children who are going hungry, but because of the political machinery, we're seeing more and more of the entitlement process shift onto politically designated demographic groups, like money for feminists and money for lesbians and the rest of it. And that whole social safety net process has become very politicized. And real quick, because we're almost at a commercial break, I want to step on back. Retailers don't like to close stores because the more stores they have, the more money they're making in a healthy economy. Every time they close a store, it means, yes, they're cutting costs, but they're losing a stream of revenue. Anyway, listen, I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize, but we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we were talking earlier about the fact that Google is under fire for having erased Palestine off the map. Doesn't exist anymore. Never did. And I mentioned yesterday that if you go to Google Earth and you type in Palestine in the search box, it drops you over in the Atlantic Ocean off the southwestern coast of Africa. And somebody zoomed in and discovered there's actually a submerged mound there. And just wrote in to say, we've discovered Atlantis. Palestine was Atlantis. I love the sense of humor we have in some of our people. All right, I understand Francis is still holding on the phone in North Carolina. Did you want to ask something else?
Yes. In general, for one thing, I'm glad you clarified the aspect of entitlements because, quite frankly, depending on where you are in the U.S., Social Security that is basically taken out of your check against your will is viewed as an entitlement. So the question is it or is it not? And if it is one, then why was it ever taken out to start with?
Well, unfortunately, government likes to call Social Security an entitlement to make you feel a sense of gratitude to them for whatever you get. But as you point out, it's actually your money. And the way Social Security was supposed to be set up was as a trust, where you would trust the government with your money to invest it and make it grow and make it available to you when you retired. Unfortunately, starting with Bill Clinton's first term in office, they basically looted the cash that was in Social Security for the baby boomer retirements and spent it as general revenues. That's where Bill Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus that the Democrats are still crowing about to this very day. He embezzled the American workers. That's not really an entitlement. That's your money to begin with, and they definitely played fast and loose with that.
Good question, because where did it really grow?
Actually, it didn't, because originally the idea was the money was going to be put in there and invested wisely, and instead it got tapped for all these pork barrel projects by members of Congress. You know, we can't get the funding from Congress. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll just fund it out of the Social Security Trust Fund as an investment. But then they went bust, and that's why Social Security taxes kept coming up. And now it too runs like a Ponzi scheme. They're having to constantly find new workers and tax them higher rates to pay for the obligations. And even then, that's not enough, which is why you're hearing all this talk about raising the legal retirement age. And having to cut benefits and raise taxes all at the same time. In a very real way, the U.S. government is already in a state of default, but they chose to default against the American workers because, unlike Wall Street and foreign governments and banks and everything, we can't harm the government's credit rating. We can't sue to repossess. And so it was a strategic default, but the U.S. government has defaulted against the American worker. No, it's not an entitlement. It was our money, and it got stolen from us and misappropriated.
Sounds like it's time for an implosion of it. Have a good one. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Ed in Mississippi. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Actually, Michigan. Ed in Michigan. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
There is a very interesting video on YouTube, Election Fraud 2016, this RICO lawsuit is real, Hillary, DNC, corporate media. And under where it says show more, gives all the details of the case name, case number, everything. It's worth looking up.
Yeah, I've got it right here. I'm going to go ahead and post it. And, this is the trustvote.org lawsuit, and there are a number of lawsuits. But as we just saw down in San Diego, they're not going to do a thing about it. That judge in San Diego came on out and said, yeah, this was not properly handled as an election. It was wide open to fraud and error, but I can't do a thing about it because the state of California has already certified.
Well, on the United States Supreme Court case where down in Florida where they stole that vote down there back in, I don't know if it was 2004.
2000.
When it came up in front of the United States Supreme Court, the court said, okay, you bring me one person into this court that can prove that that was their hanging chair on that ballot. And they couldn't do it.
Well, it was an impossible requirement. And that's very often how courts will throw a case the way they want to go. When back during the Rodney King lawsuit that led to the riots, the judge in the case literally gave the jury an instruction. They had to agree on exactly which blow of the billy club by the cop represented excessive force, or they had to acquit. And, of course, the jury couldn't agree on just which stroke of the baton represented the crossover into excessive force, and so they acquitted, and the riots happened. And, you know, the Supreme Court is just more of the same corruption at a higher level. I remember when Alan Favish brought his lawsuit before the Supreme Court for the photos of the Vince Foster crime scene with the question about reports of a second wound to the neck, and the Supreme Court turned him down under this ludicrous idea that dead people have a right to privacy.
I just have one more quick thing. It's going to change the subject.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yep.
I remember it was like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade when we were told that we were going to be getting a vaccine. And we were all ready to get the vaccine, and then they told us, then they gave us a waiver, and we had to take it home and have it signed by our parent. Then like 10 days later, they went ahead and did the vaccine. That was the swine flu vaccine.
Yes.
And for the next 4 years in a row, every spring, I've never been so sick in my entire life.
Was this back in 1976?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge disaster for the American people and for the vaccine industry because the vaccine killed 50 times as many people as the swine flu itself did. And the reality is that all of these vaccines basically work with attenuated pathogens, which is they take the infecting agent, they slap it around to weaken it, then they mix it with these adjuvants, which are supposed to provoke an immune response in the body. But the problem is very often these pathogens will return to full potency once they're in your body. And the adjuvants create all kinds of side effects like peanut anaphylaxis. And very often, we see it time and time again. They'll come on out and scream, there's a mumps outbreak here, there's a mumps outbreak there, get your vaccine. Then we find out everybody who came down with the mumps had the vaccination. It's happening again. I saw this story 2 days ago where they're out there saying, well, it must be that the mumps is now vaccine resistant because all these people who came down with it, they'd had the vaccine. So obviously they were infected with mumps that was vaccine resistant. No, they were infected by the vaccination. But it's a huge, huge moneymaker. It's $30 billion a year. And when you have a government whose sole agenda is more money and power for themselves, they just look the other way.
Our son, when he got his first round of vaccines, the doc, I was telling my friend not to have it done. I'm just like, well, just wait. Just hang on a minute. But she went ahead and had him vaccinated. The doctor told her that he was giving the child twice the amount of shots because he missed his first round. Well, that night he came up with 104 temperature. We had to take him back to the emergency room, and they were looking at us like, like we had done something. I mean, they didn't really come out and say it or anything, but we were definitely being looked at. And that's kind of strange. And his eyesight has been bad ever since. His temperature was 104. He was just on fire that night. And his personality even changed.
Well, this idea we're going to double the dose because you missed your first rounds of vaccines, it doesn't work that way. The reason, in theory, for a follow-up shot is the first one wore off. But it's all about pushing the product. And we've seen, nobody ever actually tested what happens when you take 8 vaccines, put them all in the same syringe, shake them up, and inject them into a kid. And this seems to be a big part of the autism problem. It's a big part of the sudden infant death problem. These vaccine package warnings actually say this can kill your kid. But when the kid dies, what do? Oh, you must have shaken your baby. Shaken baby syndrome. You murdered your own child, and they throw him in jail. I mean, it's a completely out-of-control system. But as long as it's making $30 billion a year, and as long as the government is getting their piece of the action in taxes, they don't care.
I don't see what part of when one door closes, another door opens, our government doesn't understand, you know?
Well, this is a government that doesn't really think in very broad strokes. It's all about where's my next big score coming from? How do I help my cronies? And if you go back to the observation I made, that what we're seeing in the United States today is a repeat of the corruption that we saw during Prohibition, where you had the rum runners and then later on the cocaine and heroin drug lords able to buy their way into the government, and all of a sudden you come to understand you have a criminal government because the guilty are protected like Hillary Clinton, and meanwhile the innocent people are being punished with things like civil forfeiture.
Yeah, I think that whole Clinton conspiracy is coming back on him already. I mean, I think that's coming back around.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else?
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Royce in Washington. Aloha, Royce. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael.
Hello, Royce.
This is Royce.
Yes.
Hello. I was listening to Dr. Bill Deagle's show before you came on, and he was talking about the assassination attempt on Donald J. Trump. What have you heard about that?
Which assassination attempt are you talking about? The guy who grabbed the gun and tried to shoot him at the rally, or the mysterious malfunction of his aircraft?
New York. It would sound like it was the other day. It was at Trump Tower.
Oh, that one. Yeah, that was, well, he wasn't actually at the Trump Tower that day. But it did strike a lot of people as rather interesting that there are two different stories. The official story is this former police officer tried to get past security, but because he was a police officer, he was allowed to have the gun, and he was allowed to basically be set free when he promised the judge he would never do it again. The other story that came out on the independent media was to the effect that the fingerprints of this guy tracked back to an FBI agent who'd been reported killed some years ago, and that he'd actually gotten through the first layer of security at the Trump Tower, and they caught him trying to breach the second layer. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I have absolutely no doubt that there are people out there right now seriously trying to figure out a way that they can assassinate Donald Trump, because he is a threat not just to Hillary Clinton, not just to Wall Street, he's a threat to the entire narcocracy. Because the narcocracy has held on to power through these two dynastic ruling families, the Bushes and the Clintons, passing the White House off back and forth, and yes, Obama was kind of a temporary placeholder. But if Donald Trump gets into the White House and Congress is cleaned out of all the cronies, you could actually see a huge unwinding of all this drug dealing and money laundering and everything else that's been going on back there.
I agree with you. I will leave you with that today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much as well. All righty. Let's see. Well, the Tantrum Squad is still doing what they're doing out there. Now, Turkey has come on out saying it's time to investigate U.S. Ambassador John Bass. They're now accusing him of being involved in that failed coup attempt against Erdogan. They're starting to build up the suspects. Remember, Turkey got all the paperwork at that Incirlik base, and they're naming names. And it's very obvious at this point, Turkey is convinced this was another U.S. attempt at a coup d'etat. And again, if you look at the history of the United States of America, from the end of World War II to the present, this is how the U.S. dominates the world. They bring governments down from inside and install obedient puppet regimes. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973. I don't think we can call Ukraine a success just yet. But that's what the U.S. does. As long as a puppet ruler is an obedient servant of the United States, they will be supported. As soon as they try and go their own way, they are destroyed. Whether it was Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and now Erdogan. And it's a serious, serious situation. Okay, now let's get on to the world of computers, because apparently this latest cyber weapon, Sauron, is causing a great deal of problem. There are now 2 top computer security firms who are working on the case here, Kaspersky Labs and Symantec. And they're saying this is a very, very sophisticated piece of espionage malware. And they're saying it steals documents, it records keystrokes, it steals encryption keys from attached USB sticks. They're now realizing this malware has been out there for 5 years. And according to Kaspersky, the amount of work required to develop this, it was millions of dollars involved. This is something created by a nation state. And it's not Russia, because most of these Sauron infections have been discovered inside Russia. And again, going on back, there's another movie. It's a documentary, 0 Day. It's on pay-per-view cable right now, and it's the story of Stuxnet and where that came from and what it was used for. We're on the beginning of a cyber war. Actually, I'm on the front lines right now because the Tantrum Squad is still attacking my server. But they've taken the internet and our computers and turned them into a battleground for their purposes. Now, we've been talking about Windows 10. And a lot of people are very upset about it. Apparently, if you have Windows 10 and you're running the Avast antivirus, and you upgrade to the anniversary edition of Windows 10, your machine will crash. And Microsoft is acknowledging there are a lot of complaints about what's going on. And they don't seem to be able to say much of anything other than try reinstalling it. And hey, doesn't the new logo look great? Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we take this next phone call, story just now breaking on governmentslaves.info, talking about an interview that Julian Assange gave on Dutch television program Nieuwsuur. And this is what he said. Whistleblowers often take very significant efforts to bring us material and often at very significant risks. There's a 27-year-old who works for the DNC and who was shot in the back, murdered just a few weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the streets in Washington. This would seem to confirm that Seth Rich was the source of the DNC email leaks and not Russia. And he was killed for being the leak. All right, let's take a phone call here. 10 Bears, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, aloha to you, Michael. It's 16 years and counting now. I've been following your publications on the Internet. And I whittled you down from about 5 or 6 sources right after 9/11 in an effort to find the least biased and bigoted type of news that I could find. You know, people who were always blaming the Democrats or Israel or the Jews or something like that. You seem to come out of the wash better than the rest, head and shoulders. So I want to appreciate and congratulate you for that. 2, I've been a Ron Paul voter, even writing him in since 1988. And I have been dying for your opinion on the following question, as parallel to all of this as it is, maybe somewhat unrelated, but I've had a dialogue with a lot of people. I'm ex-Army, fleet infantry, and when I got out, I made some associations with people who were in movements of different types, and they consistently seemed to think that the Second Amendment was extremely important and that having their guns would be the equalizing factor between them and the government if it ever come to martial law and things like this, things you've talked about extensively on your show and written about. And my question for you is, when I talk to these people who think, well, you know, we're going to have our guns, and my experience in the infantry was there's nothing that you're going to do with what we are allowed to have against an Apache gunship. If they really want you to move, they're going to make you move. And it reminds me of something that George Carlin once said, which is, you know, I'm cynical about where things are going. I don't think anything can be done about it. If you ask me, you know, it's a nice thought that we could elect this person or that person could change it, but the pile is too deep. I just think the pile is too deep. And that's what I'm wondering. If we win this effort against the system as it is, what does it look like? I mean, that's really, if you could distill it down to a paragraph, what does winning in this cause that we kind of share, to call the government out on what they're doing, to try and get equal footing that we started with before the Federal Reserve, before the government became a crony corporate entity, what does winning look like now? And I would appreciate the answer to that from you.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, can you hang on to the phone for a minute for station identification, and I'll come back with my answer. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And in response to Dan Bear's questions, obviously anybody who's been a follower of my radio show and my website for a long time knows that I am working very hard to achieve a peaceful transition of this nation. I do not support the idea of an armed, violent revolution. Okay? Now, that being said, yes, the U.S. government is very good at killing people. And anybody who goes up against the U.S. government in a front-on-front war will be slaughtered. But there are other kinds of warfare. And I hope it doesn't get to that, but there's a quote that is germane to this. And it's from the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this is the quote. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking what would have things been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family, or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, and pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organs would be very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If we didn't love freedom enough, and even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterwards. Now again, I'm not advocating violence. I'd like to find a way to avoid it. I would like to see the United States government emulate the former Soviet Union and simply collapse of its own corruption and rot and go into the dustbin of history. And then we all pull together, we look out for each other, it's going to be a couple of rough months, and then we form a new nation based on the original constitutional principles, to which I would like to see one other added. No more private central banking ever, 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 ever. But if there is a revolution in this country, only an idiot is going to play it by the rules the U.S. government has planned for. And we, as the U.S. learned in Vietnam, those who make war in an unconventional way have an advantage. Remember, these soldiers coming on in, even if they're from other countries, they're there for the paycheck. Americans pushed to it. They're fighting for their homes and their families and their loved one within eyesight, and that always gives them an advantage. Anyway, moving on back to the news here. And let's see, we were talking about computers, we're talking about computer hacking, we're talking about the Tantrum team, which is basically documenting the absolute vacuum of Hillary Clinton's political agenda by going on out and saying, we have to cheat, we have to steal, we have to, trash the other people's servers. We can't win an honest debate. We can't win an honest election. We have to have fraud and rigged machines and all the rest of that. Not a very positive public image for the Clinton supporters here. Now, apparently, the British network O2, as a promotional stunt, if you will, decided to hand out some free USB pens, and got embarrassed because apparently some of them, not all of them, but some of them from one of the providers had malware already installed on them. And that is becoming a big, big, big problem. where even if you go to eBay and you buy USB drives or whatever, you need to check them out before you plug them into your machine. Because the manufacturers of these USB drives, they'll get a little visit from somebody with a lot of money, and yeah, we'll go ahead and put that on there for you. Many years ago, when I was a developer for the Amiga personal computer, I briefly worked for a company that had developed a computer space shuttle simulator called Challenger. An unfortunate choice of names. This was actually before the disaster happened. And even more of a disaster, the master disk that was used to make the game, to send to the duplicator, wasn't formatted. They just copied the game onto it and didn't realize that disk had an Amiga virus. And that one accident put this company out of business. So you do have to be very, very careful. And where's the NSA in all of this? They're too busy whacking off to naked pictures of your significant others, according to Edward Snowden. Now, let's see, time to rejoin, do a little shout-out to all of our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. And we're just covering a bunch of stories going back and forth here. And the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. Apparently, CNN has already gone on the warpath regarding the conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton's health. Well, there's no conspiracy theory about it. The videos are out of her stumbling and falling. Everybody's seen the pictures of that Fresnel prism in her eyeglasses. And again, let's stick with provable facts. There is that email released by Judicial Watch in which Huma Abedin states to State Department employees they have to be metaphorically holding Hillary's hand when she's talking to foreign leaders because Hillary gets confused. Last thing we need is a confused president here. Launch the nuclear missiles at France. We're at war with Russia. All right, launch a missile at Russia. I don't care, any of those. It's absolutely ridiculous stuff. And again, I want to urge caution about this dump onto the net of photos of what are purported to be leaked medical records from Hillary's doctor. Because right now, they're really scared about this stuff. And we can expect they will try and poison the well, which is a propaganda tactic in which there's a legitimate issue of inquiry, and they will dump something in there that everybody will seize on and say, see, this proves we're right, and then it's exposed as a fraud in order to discredit and defuse the entire agenda. And so we have to be cautious. I know some of the online independent media have gone with this story, and I wish they would exercise a little more caution. But until I get some confirmation from some source, I'm not touching this. I'm staying focused on Huma Abedin's email. That is sourced. We've got that with good provenance. We have zero provenance on these other images, and we must be careful. Now, getting on to health and science news, and talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Hillary Clinton is fully on board with. This treaty, which is still stalled in the Senate, contains a provision that would require all member countries to adopt laws that are specifically designed to protect the profits of American pharmaceutical companies. And what this would do for the poorer nations of the world is drive the cost of medicines higher. And they're already sky high. It's all about making money, extract more money from the people of the world. And where this whole mindset, this money junkie fever breaks apart, is there's no more money out there in the general population. I understand 10 Bears was actually still holding. My apologies. I thought that you had left us. Is there something else you wanted to ask us?
Well, you know, on my question about that, I guess in the screening room it was kind of presumed I was asking a question about guns, and I kind of did frame it that way. But I guess more in the context of this election as a Ron Paul supporter who would be my first choice even now, but Trump is my preferred candidate because of just how dangerously flawed Hillary is in any way you can imagine. how can Trump play into this more peaceful resolution if that is a possibility that is seen? I mean, that's been my big question in these debates that I've had with people, and I've had many over the last couple decades, that if there's a peaceful solution, what does it look like? Because I don't see that any type of outright arms solution, except in the way that you described through Solzhenitsyn's, analogy. And I can see and understand that. But is there another way, and how does Trump play into that? And I'll take that off the air so you got your lines clear.
All right. Well, thank you very much. The answer to your question is almost unconnected with Donald Trump because it's already happening. There's sort of this old idea that the way you lose a war is to prepare to fight the last war that you won. And in the context of a revolution or a civil war, the U.S. is certainly ready to refight the American Civil War. What they're not prepared to deal with is the fact that this revolution is not being fought with guns. It's being fought with keyboards. It's being fought with blogs. It's being fought with information. It's about educating the public. And we are making tremendous strides. And so my idea of a success is a government that finally comes to realize that the days when they could lie to the American people with impunity are gone forever. And that the only way they're going to be able to continue to enjoy their lofty positions of power and wealth is they're going to have to respect the American people, respect their rights, or they're going to be out of a job. Now, it's going to be a very, very difficult process because the corrupted, entrenched establishment has really locked up the country. They're ignoring the Bill of Rights. They've got fraudulent elections. They've got the corporate media in their pockets. I would love to see a peaceful transition like the former Soviet Union. But failing that, I think we have to understand that all of our lives, the 99%ers, are going to be a whole lot better if somehow this government does go away. I think the present system is way beyond the possibility of redemption. They don't want anything to change because it works for them. It brings them wealth. It brings them power. It brings them hot and cold running sex toys. They've got all the goodies, and they think that's the way whatever deities they pray to want it. Apparently one of the released DNC emails, they're talking about sacrificing a chicken to Moloch. But ultimately, I'm looking at the Gandhi approach. That if the American people come to understand how rotted the system is, how fraudulent it is, they're just going to stop taking part. President Obama's out there saying he won't stand for a Trump presidency. Well, I won't stand for a crooked presidency. I won't stand for a dishonest presidency. I won't stand for a stolen presidency. Because if the government cannot prove beyond all doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over us, then we, the American people, are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government, to pay that government's bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the life and limb of our children in said government's wars of foreign intervention. We need a zero-tolerance policy. Until you prove the election was won honestly, you are not a legal, legitimate government. And I think we all need to adopt that same idea. You claim to be the government, prove it. Prove you won the election honestly and fairly. Don't just have some judge out in San Diego saying, yeah, it was all crooked, but we can't do anything about it. The state of California is certified. All right, we're going to go to the phones again. Steve in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, hello. You know you're a famous person in our house. We love your show.
Well, thank you very much. That's three.
I'm coming through loud and clear, aren't I?
You're now in charge of the Tennessee branch of my fan club.
Okay, fantastic. I had to call you because I had this revolutionary idea, and I don't know whether it can be instituted for this election, but I think if not, it's wonderful for the future as an idea. Since we have these liberal judges that declare that having identification when you go to vote is unfair for poor people, which is full of don't you think it's possible that the people running the sign-ins at elections could take everybody's fingerprint, and we have the technology now to put these fingerprints onto computer, and then that way they could check everybody's fingerprint to see if they had voted somewhere else a previous time. So that way, if everybody has to give their fingerprint, only one person, one vote. What do you think of that kind of situation?
It's an interesting theory. I'm concerned about its workability due to the sheer volume of data and the amount of processing power it takes to match a fingerprint. I think really that we need to go back to some common sense rules, that you register to vote, that you show your ID to prove you are the person in that registration. And then
the judges have to show their ID, so it's crazy.
Well, we understand that. The Hillary campaign and, in fact, the entire establishment, they're trying to strike down voter ID laws all across the country. They're trying to strike down laws saying you have to vote in your own district, your own precinct. They're just trying to throw the doors wide open to let the illegal immigrants and the refugees steal the election for Hillary Clinton, because she's out there promising, I'm going to make you citizens. I'm going to take all the stuff away from the legal American citizens who've lived here for generations, and I'm just going to give it all to you as long as you vote for me. That's Hillary's message to those groups. But to get on that
story,
common sense says, that you vote in the precinct you live in, you register to vote, you show your ID. Paper ballots and hand counting in front of the voters right then and there, like they used to do at the Iowa caucuses. And then the results of that precinct are available so that people can follow it all the way up the chain of data collection till it gets to the very, very top. And there's still going to be people trying to change the system. What we have right now, though, is an entrenched power elite that got where they are by election fraud, and they're not going to want to change the system at all. That's why you've got all these people out there screaming that Donald Trump is just being ridiculous to say the elections are stolen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering the question.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, there's another aspect. Anytime you get a computer involved in the election process, there's going to be fraud. That's what Bev Harris has discovered. As long as you have a computer whose internal programming is kept secret from public inspection, you're going to have a problem. And I think there was merit to the True Vote system, which really looked very workable. And it's a shame the designer died in that very suspicious accident. But the way it worked was you did have a touchscreen system, but the actual vote was recorded on a printed paper ballot. And what would happen is you'd go through and you'd make all your elections, then the printed ballot would appear underneath a glass where you could look at it and verify for yourself that it had recorded your vote accurately. If it didn't, you hit one button and it went into a shredder. If it represented your vote, you hit another button and it went into the counting machine. But it's absolutely essential. If democracy is to be preserved, we have to have an open, transparent, verifiable, auditable election system. And I'll tell you this right now. I refuse to believe that the nation that put men on the moon is unable to invent a hack-proof, reliable, accurate election system. Bev Harris, when she started looking into these electronic machines, she found dozens of ways that results can be changed without leaving a trace. It has to be by design, especially that Diebold company, because Diebold's reputation was built on their making of automated bank teller machines that never lost a penny from one end of the country to the other. And for that exact same company to come up with an election machine that is full of holes, it had to be by design. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Alrighty, so getting on back to the news here. Now, following the World Health Organization declaring that glyphosate is a probable carcinogen. They wanted to say it's a definite carcinogen, but there was a lot of lobbying and arm twisting, and they pulled back and say, all right, we won't say it's definite, but it's probable. But it's enough for people who have been exposed to large amounts of glyphosate and who have come down with cancer to start suing Monsanto. And the lawsuits are piling up to the point where it may go into a class action lawsuit. And we really do need to hold corporations to account for their misdeeds. Because the way the laws are set up now, and we've seen this in Wall Street, these corporate executives can commit all these crimes. They're immune from legal prosecution. The corporation is punished with a fine. But it's not really enough. There are no controls on corporations, which is why we have bad software, dangerous chemicals, dangerous vaccines, ineffective medicines, toxic food additives. It's completely out of control. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We got somebody waiting online to talk to me, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right to the phones here. Mike in South Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. You were explaining how people need to vote by registering, like get your driver's license and registering at that point to vote.
Yes.
Did you leave out one step, such as you have to prove your citizenship before you get on those voter rolls? Because nobody in this country is going to vote unless they're a citizen, unless you want some blowback, and there will be blowback.
Well, I absolutely agree. Voting is a right reserved to citizens of the United States of America. And, in theory, there does need to be a mechanism to protect that. Partly that is the function of the ID. That if you have legal ID in the United States, you're a legal citizen. If you're not a legal citizen, you don't have the ID.
That's true. And too many these states, such as North Carolina and California, are giving out driver's licenses left and right for IDs. As driver's licenses or IDs without proving citizenship. And I think
they should be marked as saying this person is not a citizen. But again, the liberals, their idea is they want to destroy the entity of the United States of America. That's part of that New World Order plan where they think everybody is just one global population and has a right to vote in everybody's elections. They literally hate the United States of America, and they want to tear it down, open up the borders. They literally want to take America away from the American people who built this nation generation after generation and just give it to anybody who will vote them into power.
Well, this is the reason why America became so great. There's some standards, some morals, some ethics, some integrity that has completely destroyed this country because we have gatekeeper positions of people who've been put in gatekeeper positions, such as the Supreme Court justices, who are a joke. These are not people who represent America. They represent what you call the globalists. And I'm fed up with all this nonsense. This is nothing. This is like visiting Disney World.
Well, it is an ugly, ugly mess here. And what is really alarming is seeing all these people who are just openly contemptuous of our immigration laws, of our election laws, and nobody calls them on it. The corporate media is bought and paid for it. The correspondents and the prostitutes are out there saying, oh, yeah, it's okay. We should let the illegals vote. I mean, they're criminals by virtue of the fact that they stepped foot over the border. But, yeah, let's let them vote here. And we're literally into the last days of the Roman Empire here, where everybody was voting themselves bread and circuses until the entire system collapsed.
Not enforcing the laws is what's caused the problems we have. We have bad appointed people in those positions who should be doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, they need to be yanked out and put in front of a firing squad, and hopefully they won't get hit by anything coming their way. But this stuff needs to be made an example of. This has got to stop.
Yeah, but you see, this goes all the way. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're coming up on a commercial break. This goes all the way to the top. When you have the SEC turning a blind eye to Bernie Madoff, when you have the Minerals Management Service turning a blind eye to the poor maintenance on the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, it's because they're getting instructions from on high that it's okay to pretend that you're taking care of the country and get a wonderful tax-funded salary for it, but we don't want you really taking care of the country. And again, that display that FBI Director James Comey put on regarding Hillary Clinton should have been the wake-up call to every single American that our government is a criminal government, where the people guilty of some of the greatest crimes possible are going to be protected. And totally innocent Americans...
But Obama is also the header and chief basically the people who've taken over what you call the kosher rat pack is what I call them.
Well, I don't want to get into references about kosher or the rest of it. Yes, Israel plays a tremendous influence in our government. They take a lot of that money that is given to them by our Congress, and they give it back to members of Congress to make sure that more money gets voted their way. It's a giant kickback scheme. But it's, above reproach because it's Israel. The system really is totally corrupted. I have been waiting for 22 years for somebody inside the government to stand up and say, we're going in a wrong direction and we need to make some changes. But there have been precious few people who are willing to have that kind of courage. Edward Snowden and Seth Rich are two. Okay.
I'd like to offer a way that might help if you'll back it up, and that is for every political position in this country, we put recall on it mandatory. Recall must be on every political position.
I think we should have a binding none of the above in all elections. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Mike, did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, real quick one, Michael, and that is concerning the companies to be brought back onshore that are offshore right now.
Yes. If
I'm not mistaken, I believe none of those companies offshore are paying any taxes. What makes you believe that they're going to want to come back and pay 15%?
Well, it's not as cut and dried as they're not paying taxes. The way the tax laws were changed were for American companies that are still located in America but are shipping the jobs off to subsidiaries in other countries. Because what they did is the money that was being made by those foreign subsidiaries was declared free from taxation. And that's what made it attractive for them to shut down factories here in the U.S. and send the jobs someplace else. So if you're talking about a company that's already completely out of the United States of America, well, that's a lost issue. But for companies that are here in the United States of America, such as the Ford Motor Car Company, that has, following the taxpayer-funded bailout, went ahead and built car factories down in Mexico, they did it because of the tax incentives. Now, if you reverse that and say that we're going to tax your foreign factories and foreign operations at twice the level that we're going to tax them when they're in the United States of America, they're definitely going to come back in.
One more item, very good. One more thing I'd like to say, and that is Trump's idea about a wall on the Mexican border, United States-Mexican border. There's different interpretations of walls. We could very simply put sentries every 200 yards and give them campfires and a six-pack and some pizza, and I think that'd take care of the wall.
Actually, I think it'd be easier just to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande.
Okay. All right, keep up the good work, that is.
All right, well, listen, on a more serious note, if you look at the wall Israel is building around what Google used to call Palestine, it is possible to do. And remember, President Eisenhower absolutely shut down the illegal immigration problem during his administration with only 1/10 the resources of the present Immigration and Control Agency. That's it. Called it Operation Wetback. And today it'd be announced, oh, that's a racist comment. Well, let's stop worrying about whether words are racist and actually get the problem solved. That's one of the big problems I have with political correctness. They're trying to take words and behavior and turn them into a crisis so that we're not actually dealing with real solutions to real problems anymore. All righty, let's see. We're going to go to Lucky in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. A couple of things. Well, I wanted to comment on what you were just talking about with the last caller, but yeah, it seems like, whether it's the war on drugs, the Vietnam War, you hear testimony from people that were there or participating that it had seemed like they were prevented from actually, we might have double or how many more times the resources than we had back in Eisenhower day, but, they don't want to fix things, it's kind of obvious. But as far as the Lockheed Martin thing moving to India, do you remember, I don't know if it was in Obama's first term, he took a trip with like 500 or 700 CEOs to India. First thing that came to my mind back then was and I told my wife, you're going to start to see these companies start to move their manufacturing base to India now. I mean, it's like they set the tables incrementally for this type of thing. Even when I was a kid, and we had George Bush Sr., I think it was Nixon's, George Bush Sr., Mr. Skull and Bones CIA, was Nixon's ambassador to China. And I remember that in grammar school. And, you know, after this thing played out with the manufacturing base being moved to China, I thought to myself, well, he was setting that he wasn't going there to exchange cultural ideas like they were teaching us in our social studies textbooks. He was there setting the tables with these people, saying we're going to be billionaires, and we're going to, you know, the United States is going to make everything that's made in the United States in 34 years is going to be made here, and we're going to be rich. You know, that's what these people do. It's like a big corporation protecting its own interests.
Yeah, and that was exactly the way they were thinking. Okay, and the idea was when companies started offshoring their jobs in manufacturing, they became more profitable immediately, and then everybody said, we're all going to do this. And what nobody stopped to think, and we understand the money junkies won't think, but this is where the government really failed miserably to be looking at the long term. If all of the companies in the United States are sending all of their jobs overseas, then there are no people left in the United States of America with the money to go down to the shopping mall and buy those products that were being made overseas and shipped back here. And that's why we're having this retail crisis right now. And they weren't thinking. All they were thinking is, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get a lot of money real quick and then I'm going to retire and I'll be happy and I don't care what happens afterwards. We've lost a sense of not only responsibility for our present society, but we don't really think about our responsibility to the future of the nation.
Well, that's a really dangerous place for us to be in here in this country or wherever in the world, because we're worthless then. There's nothing more to extract. There's no more money to be paid back into the system, whether it be in retail sales or buying, durable goods or tax base. You're talking about the dark ages for the people. I mean, what do you do with the, they already refer to us as useless eaters. I mean, if we have nothing left to take for them, that's a really dangerous place for us to be, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a dangerous place. As long as we can work and make them wealth, they want us around. But I think a big part of, this scream about population control and Agenda 21 and the Georgia Guidestones is they want to find some justification for simply killing off anybody who's no longer of any use to them. And we're already seeing that attitude in the Veterans Administration, the way they're treating our returned wounded veterans. The VA is spending, $20 million on artwork, $100 million on taking themselves to fancy conferences, and these wounded veterans are simply being ignored in the hope that they'll simply die and go away because they're no longer of any use to the power structure. If they can't hold a rifle and go on out and do something useful, then let's just let them die. We've been hearing about some of the more extreme elements within the government talking about how there shouldn't be such a thing as retirement anymore, that if you can't work anymore, it's cut off all your medical benefits and let the first illness that comes along take you out.
Well, I'm a veteran myself, and I try to take health care into my own hands, and I've avoided for the past, over 25 years now, avoided the VA altogether. And conventional medicine, because I don't really necessarily agree with, those treatments and stuff like that. But I kind of stayed away from the VA on purpose because I thought, man, these poor guys coming back really injured. I'm not going to go in there for a cold or some other ailment that I might have picked up here in the last few decades. But it's really amazing that story of the veterans, and it's becoming more apparent, obvious to the American people, definitely because of the treatment of the veterans after you. I mean, these people should be regarded. You talk about retirement packages, and wouldn't you think that somebody that would risk their life and limb for the country to return and be well taken care of? I mean, just that in itself has got to make people start waking up.
Well, remember, these veterans did not risk life and limb for the country. They risked their life and limb for the money junkies and the war hawks. And the money junkies and the war hawks have absolutely no sense of obligation or responsibility for these lives that they've destroyed. Now, my view is a little bit different. Whether you agree with the wars or you do not, and I most assuredly do not, we as a nation do owe a debt of honor to all those people who put that uniform on with the best of intentions. And yes, they were misused, they were misappropriated, they were turned into conquering hordes, but again, we do owe them something. We owe them a decent care for their injuries and illnesses.
We sure do, and I think that's the part that becomes apparent to the American people. Exactly the way you just explained it. It wasn't for the citizenry. It wasn't for the good of the country. It was for the good of the corporation, which it's become. And, the laws, they write the laws, they're just basically making up the rules as they go. So nothing that they're doing is necessarily considered illegal. And when you were talking about lawsuits before, and class action lawsuits against Monsanto, I think that's wonderful. But then, the deck is stacked with the nature of the revolving door between the private and the, government sector. Clarence Thomas, great example. One day he's Monsanto's attorney, one of the attorneys for Monsanto, and now he's, Supreme Court justice. So, depending on what judge is ruling against any of these lawsuits would be interesting to see, too.
Yeah, and, I think the idea of a lifetime appointment for a Supreme Court judge was a good idea on the idea that no influence could be brought to bear on them. Vote this way or I'll fire you. But what the Founding Fathers failed to do was to isolate a Supreme Court judge from all of his previous associations. And it's a bit of a failing. But in the end, the Founding Fathers designed a system they hoped was going to police and correct itself. And for a good part of the nation's history, it did work. But the money junkies have come on in. They hijacked our public currency and turned it into a private for-profit operation. And once they had that volume of cash flowing through their hands, they were able to basically warp the government to their own interests. And again, that shows the danger in allowing any one individual or corporation to acquire too much money. They can't resist the temptation to play God and mess with the nation. Whether it's a Monsanto, whether it's George Soros, there does need to be a guard and recognition that too much wealth can be a problem in the wrong hands.
Well, Mike, I certainly enjoyed talking these things out with you again, and thanks a lot for your time again.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha. November the 2nd is coming up soon, almost less than 3 months away. And really, truly, do you honestly see anything changing? When I voted the last 5 or 6 times, I've mentioned, of course, you just color in the box and then you slide it through the machine, and at that point it can do anything. But then there's that foreign country that counts all the votes and stuff. If nothing changes from, and I don't foresee that it will, then we're going to get what we've always gotten, something we don't want. Now,
well, again, let me come on back to this. Okay, election fraud can swing a contest a few percentage points. But if they try and reverse a landslide, everybody knows what happened. And that's why I'm trying to get this viral campaign going that on Election Day, which, by the way, is November 8th this year, that everybody who votes for Donald Trump just take a couple of pieces of tape and make a little T on the front of your clothing, so that everybody will be able to look around, whether it's the supermarket or the library or the laundromat, and see how many people voted for Donald Trump. And that is going to make a stolen election immediately obvious to everybody. The other thing that we may see happen, taking the lesson from the Brexit, they tried to rig that as hard as they could, but they came up short, because you cannot reverse a landslide without triggering a revolution.
Well, Paul Harvey told of this little couple that was out and at a lover's lane, and this fella broke in on them, and the young boy realized this guy was going to kill him and have his way with his girlfriend. He had a knife, this guy that was going to stab the boy. He took it into his hands because he grabbed the knife with his hands, and he was able to overcome this guy and save the both of them. When it looks so bleak, sometimes you have to make the move. And it's like they're so rotten in government, they're going to pull it. We both know it. We all know
they're going to try to do it, okay? But again, election fraud that tries to reverse a landslide is going to be so obvious to everybody that nobody's going to believe the results of the election.
Well, I'll be wearing my big Trump shirt and I voted for him. Everybody remember that one because, I'm just, scared to death of Hillary Clinton and what's coming with her. And thank you so much for being there. I'm Michael Rivero. I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Aloha yourself. And again, the other thing that we need to talk about is Hillary's people are basically taking the position about you don't really have any reasons to vote for Donald Trump. Let's reverse that on her, okay? Let's think about the reasons we have to vote against Hillary Clinton, because she has no defense against any of that. And that's really what this election is going to be about. It's not so much about being in favor of Trump, it's just being opposed to Hillary Clinton and the people she represents. All right, we're going to go to Brian in Chile. Brian, we're rushing down to the end of the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, thanks for taking my call, Mike, and greetings from Chile. Yeah, I wanted to chime in on this issue of Trump's pledge to build a wall between the United States and Mexico.
Yes.
And I wanted to extol the virtues of this idea by alluding to the obvious historical precedent, and that's the Great Wall of China. Now, Mike, the Great Wall of China was built 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, Mike, and here in the year 2016, to this day, there is not one single illegal Mexican immigrant living in China.
Well, there's a success for you. I was about to tell you that in actual fact, the Great Wall of China failed to keep the Mongols out, but you're absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with having a wall. You see walls throughout history all the time. And this idea that we do not want to allow people into this country who do not come in by the legal immigration methods is somehow racist is absurd. Even George Orwell would laugh at that one.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to leave you with that and remember that, a little bit of folly is cherished by the wisest men.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. And again, believe it or not, the company that built the wall around what Google used to call Palestine is already approaching Trump. They want to bid on the contract to build the wall across Mexico. But like I said, the low-cost option, let's just put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. And for those who actually make it across, we could have this little illegal immigrant trebuchet that flings them back across the border back into Mexico. But the bottom line is, when you're talking about the illegal immigrants, focus on that first word. That's why they're trying to change it. Oh, they're not illegal immigrants, they're undocumented, citizens. Hillary Clinton isn't a crook, she's an undocumented felon. You see how they try and change the meaning by changing the words. We got to take a break for commercial, back with the last segment and last phone call of our show today. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Final segment of our program today. We're going to take our last phone call from Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I get to kill this volume here. Yeah, I wanted to respond to the lady that called in a little while ago talking about, other countries counting the votes. I'm surprised that we didn't have more of an outrage over this the last go around when Spain counted the votes to get Obama reelected and all of this. But now, here we come on another, kind of promises to be quite an entertaining political season again. And this time around, I am trying to get people awake and aware and paying attention to this in the hopes that if they pull this, we're going to let another country count our votes again.
Well, let me ask you a question.
That if they don't think we're responsible for counting our own votes, what makes you think that they honestly believe you're responsible enough to vote for whoever is going to lead your nation? And if they do this again, we need to be absolutely outraged, and we need to rise up.
Well,
this has gone too far.
It has gone too far. And here's the really important question. Why can't we count our own votes? That's the way it was originally done. Everybody would meet at the Grange, and they'd all vote, and they'd all stand there while the votes were counted, and it was impossible to rig the elections that way. That's what led to that Battle of Athens, Tennessee. Everybody was voting, and then all of a sudden the corrupt politicians said, well, we're just going to take the ballot boxes and we're going to count them in private. And that's when everybody got their guns and said, no, you will not either.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for us not to...
He's the National Guard, took the weapons from the National Guard, took back their ballots, and then after it was over with, they returned the guns to the National Guard. That's how it's done.
And again, this is the focus. Why can't we count our own elections? Why do we need a company, whether it's in the United States or somewhere else, why do we need a company to count our votes? We all know how to count. We went to high school. We can count our own votes. We don't need a company and a corporate media to decide our elections for us. We can count our own votes. Okay?
And that's why I'm trying to get everybody to understand. If they do this again, that's where we need to draw the line. No more. No more. Thanks, Mike. I'm out, man.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. One thing should be obvious from the stink that Donald Trump is making about rigged elections right now. If we can get him into the White House, he's going to be open to an overhaul of the election system and turning it back into something that is transparent, honest, verifiable. And we need that. We will not have our democracy back as long as we have this crooked election system. We're in the middle of a peaceful revolution to bring about dramatic change to this country. I hope it's not going to turn violent, but that, unfortunately, is entirely in the hands of the money junkies. All right, quick little story before we hit the top of the hour and the music. Remember that Muslim teenager built himself a digital clock, took it to school, got arrested because everybody thought it was a bomb. His family is suing the school, and well, they should. They didn't have a single teacher who could look at that and say, it's just a digital clock. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, you are all part of the independent media. Go on out and act like it. Share what you know with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.